We often hear that medieval armor was heavy, outdated, or simply impractical. But when you look at the real battlefield evidence, a completely different picture appears. Medieval armor wasn't just protection, it was a refined technology that gave soldiers a level of mobility, endurance, and survivability that modern people rarely expect. And the surprising part? Many of its design ideas are still used in today's protective gear, even if no one talks about it. Number 1. The problem everyone overlooks. When most people imagine medieval warfare, they see a movie scene in their heads. A slow, clunky knight dragging around a heavy metal shell, barely able to move, gasping for air, and collapsing under his own armor. That image is so common that many adults genuinely believe medieval armor was badly designed and almost useless. The strange thing is that this picture is almost completely wrong. Medieval armor, especially in England and Western Europe, was a highly developed technology. It was built by specialists who treated their craft as a science, even if they didn't use that word. They understood how to protect the human body while still letting a soldier move, fight, and survive long campaigns. The first big mistake people make is judging armor by how it looks on a mannequin in a museum. There it stands, stiff, shiny, and often assembled on a body shape that doesn't match a real human. Sometimes the pieces aren't even put together correctly. Of course, it looks unnatural. But armor was never meant to sit still. It was designed to move with a living body that bends, twists, reaches, and runs. Medieval armorers created plate segments that overlapped like scales and connected with rivets, leather straps, and sliding joints. When fitted correctly, the plates shifted as the knight moved, letting him raise his arms, turn his head, bend his knees, and rotate his hips without the metal cutting into him or locking up his joints. Many knights and professional soldiers trained in armor from a young age. Imagine wearing a weighted but perfectly balanced suit while you ride, run, and drill almost every day. Your muscles adapt, your balance changes, and your brain starts to treat the armor as part of your body. Modern reenactors who wear historically accurate reproductions show exactly this. They run, climb ladders, roll on the ground, and even perform jumps in full plate. They're not superhuman. They're just using equipment that was designed with movement in mind. This alone already breaks the popular myth that armor turned knights into walking statues. Weight is another point people misunderstand. Yes, armor was heavy, but not in the way most imagine. A full set of late medieval plate armor usually weighed around 20 to 25 kilograms. That sounds like a lot, until you remember that modern soldiers often carry similar or even greater loads in the form of body armor, radios, ammunition, water, and packs. The real advantage of medieval armor is how well that weight was distributed. Instead of hanging from the shoulders like a badly adjusted backpack, the weight was spread across the hips, chest, and legs. In a properly fitted suit, the knight didn't feel like he was carrying armor. He felt like he was wearing a hard second skin. Contemporary sources even mention that some fighters preferred plate over heavy chainmail because it felt easier to bear over long periods. Another important detail is how armor adapted to different threats over time. Early medieval warriors relied heavily on chainmail, which is a fabric of interlocking metal rings. It protected well against cuts and slashes, but strong thrusts and blunt impacts could still be dangerous. As crossbows, longbows, and more powerful polearms became common, armorers answered by adding rigid plates to cover key areas like the chest, shoulders, and thighs. By the late Middle Ages, full plate harnesses appeared, creating a nearly complete shell around the vital parts of the body. This wasn't random extra metal. Each new plate was added because real battles had proven where soldiers were getting hurt. English medieval warfare played a huge role in pushing these improvements. During the 100 Years' War, campaigns in France involved long marches, bad weather, and sudden violent clashes. Knights and men-at-arms needed armor that could protect them from arrows, spears, and swords, but still let them function after hours of fatigue. If their gear had truly been as useless as people think, they would have abandoned it quickly. Instead, they invested more, fine-tuned designs, and passed down knowledge through generations of armorers. So why do so many modern people laugh at medieval armor and treat it like a clumsy relic? One reason is that today's armor and tactical gear industry almost never compares itself to the Middle Ages. Companies promote lightweight vests, ceramic plates, and modern helmets as if they are the first serious answers to battlefield threats. But medieval craftsmen were solving very similar problems: how to protect vital organs, how to keep a fighter mobile, and how to balance cost, comfort, and durability. The difference is that medieval armor was made for close quarters combat and heavy melee fighting, not just distant gunfire. In that environment, plate armor wasn't just good enough, it was often the best technology available. If you look at it from a practical point of view, medieval armor was less about looking impressive and more about staying alive. The people who wore it were not foolish. They were experienced fighters who had seen what happened to unprotected bodies on the battlefield. They chose armor because, for their time, it worked extremely well. That's the part people overlook. Armor was a survival tool, engineered by necessity, refined by real bloodshed, and trusted by those who had every reason to demand results. Number 2. What armor really did in battle. To understand why medieval armor was genuinely superior in many situations, you have to picture what real medieval combat looked like. Not movie slow-motion duels, but messy, dynamic, exhausting fights. Soldiers moved over uneven ground, tripped in mud, crashed into each other in tight formations, and often fought in bad weather, while already tired from marching. In that environment, armor wasn't decoration. It was a working system designed to keep you fighting after the first hit, the 5th hit, and sometimes the 20th hit. Weapons of the time were shaped by the armor they faced. When chainmail and padded clothing were most common, swords were optimized for cutting and slashing at exposed areas. Axes and maces tried to crush or tear through the rings. As plate armor spread, many traditional slashing attacks became far less effective. So weapon makers and warriors responded with designs that focused on joints and weak spots. You see more picks, warhammers, poleaxes, and specialized spearheads, all meant to punch into gaps or transfer heavy blunt force. This arms race is important. If armor had truly been useless, weapon designs would not have changed so dramatically. People change their tools only when the old ones stop working. In major English and French battles, like Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt, armor played a central role in who survived. Even when things went wrong, for example, heavily armored knights getting bogged down in mud, it wasn't the armor that failed to protect them. It was the ground that trapped them. Where armor really shined was in its ability to handle repeated impacts. A soldier might take glancing sword blows on his arms, deflected hits on his helmet, and hard strikes on his chest plate, and still stay in the fight. The plates spread the shock over a wider area, preventing bones from breaking as easily and keeping joints from dislocating. Helmets are a perfect example of this practical thinking. Medieval armorers designed great helms, bassinets, and later more compact visored helmets with angled surfaces that made blows slide rather than land flat. This is exactly the same principle used in modern ballistic helmets, where curves help deflect bullets and shrapnel. In battle, that meant a knight could take hits to the head that would have killed or disabled an unprotected man and still keep his senses long enough to keep fighting or withdraw safely. For commanders, that reliability was priceless. Another thing armor did in battle was protect stamina. It sounds strange, because we often think of heavy armor as tiring, but imagine fighting without it. Every cut, every small wound, every deep bruise takes energy away from you. Even minor injuries make you slower and weaker. A well-armored soldier, on the other hand, could come through the first wave of battle with barely a scratch, even if he had been hit multiple times. His muscles might be tired, but his body was still intact. That meant he could hold the line longer, keep discipline in formation, and support his comrades when things got chaotic. Over the course of a long engagement, this endurance was a huge advantage. Armor also changed behavior on the battlefield. A warrior who trusted his protection could push forward more aggressively, knowing he had a safety margin. You see this in historical descriptions of shock cavalry charges and determined infantry pushes. Those in plate armor were often placed in the most dangerous positions because they had the best chances of survival. The armor wasn't just physical protection, it was psychological. It gave confidence to the wearer and to the men standing beside him. From a practical standpoint, commanders saw armor as an investment. Outfitting a knight or man-at-arms in high-quality gear was expensive, but losing a trained fighter with years of experience was even more costly. Armor helped reduce those losses. When you compare survival rates, heavily armored soldiers generally had better odds of returning home, even if the overall battle was a disaster. That's why military leaders kept funding better armor rather than abandoning it. It wasn't a tradition they clung to blindly. It was a tool that kept their best people alive. When we look back now and think, why did they stay in armor for so long if guns were appearing? The answer becomes clearer. For a long time, armor still did its job against many real threats on the field. Early firearms were slow, inaccurate, and not always powerful enough at range to penetrate well-made plate. In that mixed battlefield of arrows, lances, swords, and occasional gunshots, armor continued to give real protection. It only started to disappear when armies grew larger, wars became more about mass production and mobility, and it became too expensive and impractical to give full-plate armor to every soldier. That shift was about economics and logistics, not because armor had suddenly stopped working. Number 3. Why medieval armor was smarter than you think. The more you study medieval armor in detail, the more you realize that it wasn't just metal clothing. It was a carefully thought-out system built around how the human body works. Armorers had no modern science degrees, but they observed reality extremely closely. They watched how fighters moved, where they got injured, how metal behaved when struck, and how fatigue built up over time. Then they adjusted their designs again and again. Over generations, this trial-and-error approach created something very close to an engineered product. Every curve in a breastplate, every ridge on a helmet, and every hinge at an elbow or knee served a purpose. Curved surfaces deflected strikes instead of letting them land squarely. Ridges added strength without adding too much extra weight, just like the ribs in modern metal beams. Joints were covered with sliding and overlapping plates, allowing the arm or leg to bend while still blocking direct access to vital arteries and tendons. It's the same logic modern engineers use when they design moving machines. Protect the most important parts without locking the system in place. Chainmail also deserves much more respect than it usually gets. It wasn't just a net of loose rings. High-quality mail in the Middle Ages used riveted rings, each one closed with a tiny pin. This made the fabric far more resistant to cutting and tearing. Under the mail, soldiers wore padded garments, usually thick quilted jackets called gambesons. These absorbed impact, reduced bruising, and stopped the metal from digging into the skin. When you combine padded cloth, chainmail, and plate, you get a layered defense similar to modern body armor systems that mix soft and hard elements. Each layer handles a different kind of threat. In English medieval contexts, especially from the 13th to 15th centuries, armorers learned how to heat-treat steel to change its properties. By controlling how metal was heated and cooled, they could make the outer surface harder while keeping the inside more flexible. This combination stopped blades from biting too deeply, while preventing the entire plate from snapping under heavy force. The idea is very similar to modern technologies used in tools, vehicles, and even skyscrapers. Hardness on the outside, toughness within. Weight distribution, again, shows how smart this technology was. Instead of letting all the load pull down on the shoulders, armorers designed breastplates, backplates, falds, the skirt-like plates around the hips, and tassets, thigh plates, to share the weight. The result was that the legs, core, and hips worked together to support the armor. This is almost exactly how modern load-bearing vests and tactical belts are designed. Firefighters, bomb technicians, and riot police follow the same principle without always realizing they're using a concept that medieval craftsmen had already mastered. Even comfort and climate were considered. Ventilation slots around the face and chin let air flow into helmets. Gaps under the arms and at the back of the knees helped heat escape without leaving major vulnerabilities. Padded layers soaked up sweat, reduced chafing, and allowed the body to regulate temperature better. In cold climates, armor could actually help trap warmth, making long night watches or winter marches more bearable. None of this was accidental. If armor had been unbearable to wear for hours, soldiers would have rejected it, and armorers' businesses would have collapsed. Customization is another area where medieval armor was extremely advanced. A good suit wasn't something you picked off a shelf in one size. Knights were measured carefully, and the armor was built around their bodies. Over the years, pieces could be adjusted, repaired, or upgraded as the fighter gained weight, muscle, or scars. This meant each harness fit its owner like a tailored suit. That tight fit reduced rattling, improved balance, and made movement feel more natural. When your gear fits that well, you don't think about it with every step. You just move. All of these details came from real experience in war. Armorers got feedback after each campaign. They heard where plates bent, where arrows slipped through, where fighters felt restricted, and where the padding wore out fastest. Then they modified patterns, reinforced weak spots, and adjusted the geometry of their designs. Over time, this constant testing and improvement turned armor into a mature, reliable technology. It lasted for centuries, not because people were afraid to change, but because it consistently did what it needed to do. Keep trained warriors alive in one of the most brutal environments humans have ever created: the medieval battlefield. Number 4. The social power behind armor. In medieval society, armor was never just metal shaped for protection. It acted as a complete social symbol that defined status, duty, and personal identity. A knight's armor wasn't simply put on for battle. It represented years of training, discipline, and responsibility. From the moment a young squire began his training, he learned that armor was an extension of his role in society. The ability to wear, maintain, and fight effectively in armor signaled maturity, readiness for leadership, and commitment to serving a lord or king. In many ways, the suit of armor functioned like a medieval uniform of authority. It instantly communicated who held military duty, who bore responsibility for others, and who was expected to stand firm when danger appeared. English knights especially carried a reputation for strict discipline and organization on the battlefield. Their training wasn't just about swinging weapons. It involved coordinated formations, communication through visual signals, and learning how to keep morale steady during chaos. Armor reinforced this mental toughness. When soldiers saw a line of armored knights advancing, their confidence rose. The psychological effect mattered just as much as the physical defense. An armored figure appeared unbreakable, and in a time when fear could tear an army apart faster than any blade, that impression was invaluable. The presence of armored knights could cause enemy lines to hesitate or lose cohesion even before blows were exchanged. The influence of armor went far beyond the battlefield's edge. The industry behind it shaped entire parts of the medieval economy. Crafting armor required a long chain of specialists. Before a single metal plate ever reached an armorer's workshop, miners extracted iron ore. Charcoal burners produced the high-quality fuel needed to smelt and shape metal, and wagoners transported these raw materials between towns. Blacksmiths heated and hammered the metal into workable shapes. Riveters connected plates. Leather workers produced straps and harness systems. Tailors created padding and custom garments to wear beneath the steel. Polishers buffed surfaces to prevent rust and improve deflection. Finally, merchants managed trade routes to supply armies across Europe. These interconnected professions formed a living ecosystem around warfare. Entire towns became known for specific armor components. One village might specialize in chainmail links, another in helmet visors, another in gauntlets. This constant collaboration allowed rapid innovation. When soldiers returned from campaigns with feedback about new threats or weaknesses, armorers adjusted their designs almost immediately. A flaw discovered in one season could be solved by the next. That adaptability is part of what made medieval armor so advanced for its era. On the battlefield, armor dictated strategy. Heavily armored knights on horseback could deliver powerful shock charges that broke enemy lines. Their protection allowed them to ride directly into dense formations without being immediately overwhelmed. Infantry equipped with partial plate or reinforced mail held the most dangerous positions: narrow passes, gatehouses, bridges, and breaches in fortifications. Commanders arranged their troops based on armor distribution, The most reliable fighters, protected by the best gear, formed the backbone of any army's tactical plan. Armor wasn't just something soldiers wore. It shaped how medieval warfare itself evolved. As the Middle Ages progressed, armor spread across more of society than people often assume. While early plate armor was expensive and usually worn by nobles, later improvements in production made protection more accessible. Wealthy merchants, skilled craftsmen, and professional soldiers purchased helmets, mail shirts, and breastplates. Larger armies needed a greater number of durable fighters, so armorers developed cheaper, modular pieces that could be produced faster. By the late 14th and 15th centuries, it wasn't uncommon to see entire infantry units equipped with partial plate armor, giving them far better survival chances than earlier generations of soldiers. Armor also became deeply symbolic. Medieval artists portraying knights weren't just capturing fashion, they were painting ideals. Armor represented loyalty, bravery, discipline, and readiness to act. A knight fully armored stood as a symbol of social order, moral responsibility, and stability. In many stories and chronicles, the knight's armor reflected not only his wealth, but his values. That cultural weight helped maintain respect for armored warriors long after their battlefield dominance faded. Modern people sometimes dismiss this symbolism as romantic exaggeration, but for medieval communities, armor was a visible reminder that trained defenders existed, willing to risk their lives to protect the land. Its presence was reassuring. When peasants saw armored riders patrolling the countryside or standing guard at a castle, they recognized them as guardians of stability. That social power, the mix of authority, identity, and duty, made armor one of the most important non-verbal languages of the Middle Ages. Number 5. What modern experts don't tell you. When we look at modern tactical equipment, body armor, riot gear, and military loadouts, it's surprising how rarely experts acknowledge the medieval roots behind many of these designs. The challenges faced by medieval knights were remarkably similar to those faced by today's soldiers. They needed to stay mobile while carrying protection. They needed gear that could absorb and deflect impacts, and they needed a system that balanced weight without exhausting the wearer. Medieval craftsmen solved many of these problems through centuries of experimentation, yet their work is often brushed aside as outdated simply because it came from a pre-industrial era. One of the biggest misconceptions is that medieval armor instantly became useless once firearms arrived. This is simply not true. Early guns were slow to reload, unpredictable, and not always powerful enough to penetrate high-quality steel at standard battlefield distances. Armorers responded quickly by thickening breastplates and helmets, creating proofed armor tested by firing a pistol directly at the metal. Surviving breastplates from the 16th century often still show the dent where the test shot landed. That dent wasn't damage, it was a guarantee. It meant the armor had passed a real performance test. So why did armor eventually start disappearing if it still worked? The answer isn't engineering, it's economics. As armies shifted from small groups of elite fighters to massive formations of common soldiers, outfitting everyone in a custom-fitted harness of plate became far too expensive. At the same time, gunpowder weapons became cheaper, faster to produce, and more widely used. Warfare changed from a focus on individual skill and heavy protection to mass tactics, mobility, and ranged firepower. Armor didn't fail. The battlefield changed around it. If people understood how effective medieval armor truly was, they would see the Middle Ages differently. Knights weren't slow-moving tanks weighed down by their own equipment. They were highly trained athletes inside advanced protective systems. Medieval armies weren't chaotic mobs. They were organized groups that relied on layered defense, coordinated formations, and the psychological strength provided by armored leadership. What makes medieval armor even more impressive is how much of the original knowledge still exists. There are surviving treatises on armoring techniques, bills of sale documenting specific materials, and thousands of preserved helmets, gauntlets, and breastplates that show construction methods with remarkable precision. When modern researchers test accurate replicas, the results consistently prove how well these designs performed. They deflect sword cuts, withstand arrow strikes, disperse blunt force, and allow full body movement much better than most modern people expect. The irony is that modern tactical industries use many of the same principles: curved surfaces for deflection, layered materials for strength, modular components for customization, yet rarely acknowledge that medieval craftsmen discovered those ideas long before industrial science. It's not that medieval engineers were somehow ahead of their time. It's that necessity forced them to innovate relentlessly. Survival on the battlefield demanded constant improvement, and the armor industry delivered. This forgotten expertise matters because it changes how we understand history. The Middle Ages weren't dark when it came to technology. They were full of practical engineering, problem-solving, and iterative development. Medieval armor stands as one of the clearest examples of this creativity. It was far more than decoration or a symbol. It was a brilliant technological solution to the brutal reality of medieval warfare. If anything, medieval armor deserves more respect today. Not because of nostalgia or romanticism, but because it reveals how smart, resourceful, and inventive people were even without modern tools. The armor industry may have faded, but its lessons remain. Balance weight, engineer for movement, protect the vital areas, and refine designs based on real-world experience. These ideas still shape modern protective gear, even if the medieval craftsmen who first developed them remain uncredited.